This is the Scare Actor Podcast, episode 3 on WCVWR. That was probably wrong. Bradley here, and we are going to talk about scare zones and mazes. Here I got David and Nathan with me. They're going to say hi.
Hi, my name is Nathan.
Hey, I'm David.
It is getting into fall here in Virginia. It's gotten pretty chilly. It's actually getting into some very haunt-like weather. Looking forward to the haunt season, but Corona's still kind of getting in the way of all of that. So today we're going to talk about the differences and similarities of scare zones as well as mazes or haunted houses. There's different terminology depending on where you were from or what place you were working at, but we worked at King's Dominion together. I'll have Nathan introduce what he did in his background.
Yeah, so I worked at King's Dominion Haunt for 4 seasons, 2015, I think. I'm looking at you guys like you know my...
It was about
2015. Yeah, I think 2015 to 2019 as a vampire. I worked at the same zone all 4 seasons as a vampire in a zone called The Lair.
So I worked 5 seasons at King's Dominion. First 3 were at a maze called Cornstalkers, and my last 2 full seasons were in the Lair with Nathan.
The Lair was an interesting one. Essentially, you went through a tunnel that had a bunch of grass over top of it, big rubber curtains that kept you from seeing on the inside. They had a strobe in there, multiple strobes. It was bad. They can tell you better than I about the disorientation of that zone, because it's one of the few zones where it was outdoors, but they still managed to blind people.
There were so many lights. I mean, just a quick rundown of what it was, I guess. It was a tunnel, 200 yards or so, give or take, and it was covered on top with a bunch of grass and foliage, vines and stuff like that. And during the summer, it's a really nice little getaway from the heat and all that good stuff. But they repurpose it for that, for haunt. The entrances were covered with fear flaps, I suppose. They reminded me of like a deli or like a butcher shop or something like that. No, I don't know if that was intended or not, but it was a time. And smoke machines, fog machines, whichever you like to call them, and so many strobe lights.
Yeah, not only with the lights and fog, but they also had these wooden caskets and what you would call the grave vault, but they were all made out of wood instead of concrete like they normally are. They had those scattered on the ground were actually the grave vaults, and for the most part, the first season I was there, you could get on them. The last season we were there, safety cracked down and said, nope, you can't get on these things, even though they were purpose-built.
Probably a good idea.
Yeah, it was a
I'm-
good idea, but it was so much better when it was so much better when they would allow us to climb up on stuff, just because it just made things so much more dynamic. But people messed it up because they couldn't just do it properly. People got hurt because they were dicking around essentially.
Oh yeah, there was this one person, I'm not going to name names, but there was this one person my last season in the Lair who would purposely antagonize the guests beyond where she should have. She should have just stopped, walked away, broken the situation, but she kept going at guests to the point where when she was standing on them, the guests would get so irate and so angry, they would rip her down off. She'd hit her butt, maybe hit her back on the coffin.
That would happen constantly, at least for the season that David and I started working together. It was a lot of fun to get on top of those things, but some of the patrons of the park were a little loosey-goosey with the social responsibility to each other and whatnot, and they would like to try and start fights and anything. Workers of haunt were not. Yeah, some of them definitely liked to antagonize people, and that's a factor.
Yeah, they definitely cut back on a lot of the freedoms and fun. We also had not only with the horizontal grave vaults, but we had vertical coffins stacked up on these little
Those
almost
were
like
great.
yeah.
I love those.
Yeah, I remember used to hide behind Nathan. I remember used to hide behind one of the vertical coffins that were actually more coffin shaped, like the very elongated diamond. But they were usually had them on either a really small and medium, and then a very tall one in the center. But they were just plywood boxes, vertical rectangles that were painted to make look like old stone walls, and that's where they had the vertical boxes. In the center, we had these very. Oh, what was the original vampire movie? Oh, what was it called? Yeah, Nosferatu.
Yeah.
It was very Nosferatu style of vampire with skeletonized wings. Now, I think you can explain it better.
All right. So for a few seasons, it wasn't there when I first started working in the Lair. Yeah, but for the last couple seasons, they hung up these massive Batman looking things, like Nightmare Batman status, where it was a giant mutant man with wings slash arms, and they were yeah, total like monster man looking things, but they were huge, and they hung them up from the top. And we like to play into it, because there's so many lights and all this stuff. Did they have light up eyes?
I don't remember.
They might have had, they might have had like kind of fluorescent, not fluorescent, but like gem looking eyes. So when light hit it, it would like reflect off them and that kind of thing.
All the years that I worked there, I never noticed that. Like I never just looked up and noticed that.
Yeah, you had to get people that knew that they were there and like to like play with that and be like, oh, like have you seen? We'd always say it was like a relative or something like that. Yeah, and we'd point up and they'd be like, oh my God.
What would y'all say is one of your best scares that you've done in that environment?
I don't know if I can say how it felt to work in a maze per se, but sometimes it definitely felt to me like we might have had a little bit more of a personal connection to some of the customers or whoever, because they're out in the park. They didn't say like, all right, we're ready to go through this experience, so to say. Like you can't maneuver through the park without going through the zone. So like they're a lot more vulnerable.
Like they're there whether they like it or not.
Yeah, they didn't really have a choice to go through this part of the park or not, So a lot of them did kind of run together for me. I definitely had a handful of people throughout the years that said that they relieved themselves in some way or another. Number one or number two, take your option, I guess.
Have you described what a depends moment is, Brad?
I specifically didn't call it that in the last episode because I'm not giving them that credit. If you make somebody shit themselves, that's what we call it. They shit themselves or they piss themselves. Say it. Call a spade a spade.
Yeah. There was like quite a few of those times. Most of them, for ours in particular, because we were, we're vampires. The whole point is kind of that you like stalk your prey and stuff like that.
Vampires were all what era? Was it like Victorian?
Everyone did have kind of a separate timeline. Wouldn't you say, David?
No, we were all pretty much Victorian. I mean, at least the costume. Some people definitely had more fancy clothing, white shirts with frills and lace on the nape, or I'm sorry, the neck area and around the wrist. Wow, I remember, Nate, you had more of just a simple suit style. I mean, yeah, it was more of a tailcoat to some degree, I think, your first season.
It depended on the season. It definitely depended on the season that we were there, because I remember, like, the first 2 years, I think. One year I had, like, a butler-looking outfit, but, like, a straight-up, like, Alfred from Batman, like, butler costume. It was just a black suit with, like, a weird waistcoat vest-type deal.
Yeah, I also know other people that were there. There was one, remember the gentleman with the long blonde hair, always wore the giant scaleras. Like I said, we don't want to drop names, but he always had extremely Victorian.
Pirates of the Caribbean is what he
No.
Y'all were Pirates of the Caribbean.
No, but yes, yeah, okay, so yeah, the women actually did wear dresses. I was thinking about that earlier. The women did wear dresses that were very Pirates of the Caribbean style. Like you would see a lot of. Let's be honest, they would see.
Made them look like barmaids or something.
Yeah, no, the prostitutes.
Okay.
No, but seriously, that's what it was. You look at the scenes where he's at Tortuga and the other pirate islands, and you have like Johnny Depp interacts with the sex workers, because that's their right. If they want to do it, that's fine. But he interacted with some of the ladies who were trying to get theirs, and that was what they were wearing.
I think it's in the same era. I think the Pirates of the Caribbean thing is a good connection because even though Pirates of the Caribbean doesn't technically exist in the same realm or universe as ours, separate timeline. Yeah, it's like, but still, I think that the era and the costuming is very similar. But it's like the vampires that are in the Pirates of the Caribbean universe almost. But there's no allusion to Pirates of the Caribbean in the lair. Let's make that clear. Don't get it twisted. There's no Pirates of the Caribbean.
So the guy with the blonde hair, I remember the movie now. He was wearing an outfit that reminded me of Lestrade in an Interview with the Vampire. Oh, yeah. Back when he's having flashbacks to when he's in No, it's Tom Cruise. I think it's Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. Yeah, that's what it is. It's Tom Cruise is having flashbacks to when he's in Louisiana with Brad Pitt, and they're both vampires, and then like the little girl comes out of somewhere, I forget exactly.
I guess my point that I was like trying to make was that everybody did have their own approach to what like kind of vampire they were gonna be, and I think you could say that for all of the mazes or the zones. Everyone had like the general theme, but everyone would take it and run with it to be however they wanted. Everyone had their own character. They advised us when we first started working there to do background stories and things like that, like try to make some sort of lore for like your individual character.
We talk about our Talk about your one of y'all's characters.
I think that I didn't do any of that.
Okay, so you're one of those. You didn't have like you didn't write anything down. Like
Yeah, I didn't write anything down. I definitely had like motivations, I guess. I played basically a butler most of the time that I was there. I think that fit my personality well. I just didn't feel the need to do that to solidify my being, and I just wasn't that kind of person, I guess. But
it's one of those things where like you don't have to have a backstory for the quality, but we got two people on different ends of the spectrum here, which I think is kind of funny because Nathan didn't do that, but David wrote this whole thing, which he can even recite because. Yeah, if you want to if you want to just read it, go for it.
I didn't know if you were ready to read it. I was just pulling up just to remember my word count because I remember it was disgusting. It was disgustingly long. So I'm gonna just preface this. I got drunk one night. Actually, I know exactly when I wrote this. Oh no, that's one of the last times I opened it and messed with it. But I got drunk one night right before my first season in the lair. I mean, that's what I wrote it on. I wrote it on my phone. I got fucked up one night and wrote this thing at like 2:00 in the morning in like 2 hours. And it was a lot of typing and a lot of like fixing voice text because a voice to text was garbage. Also, I was fucked.
Voice to text when you're drunk is like a whole nother thing.
So I even named my character. I did some research to like his possible origin. I was like, all right, so I want to do like around 1750s, like pre-Revolutionary War, because I want my guy to definitely have seen some shit. But at the same time, it's like, what was going on? Where can I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna do American. Because at first I was like, I'm gonna do an American accent because I could do a really good Southern American accent. And then when I got there, I was like, oh shit, I can't do Southern American here. Everybody's doing like Europe.
Just gonna think you're like a guy. Like people, guess would probably think like everyone would have their own like kind of nicknames thrown at them and stuff. I mean, I would get Alfred. Funny enough that I brought that up a minute ago, but like I would get that because I was like a butler guy, blonde hair guy with the all over eye contacts. He would get Jack Sparrow. That was his name, right?
Him and one of our other coworkers that always tag team and did tag team scares. He had the long black hair. The long black hair. With the black hair, he would actually get more Jack Sparrow because he did more.
Yeah, the walk.
Yeah, he did the walk.
The saunter.
And his accent was definitely more like piratey, I guess.
He definitely played up the drunk thing a little bit more than this other person, but you know.
Dude, that was a good takeoff though. Like I actually learned that from him. That was on a crowded night when the mazes had conga lines and we were like wall to wall with guests from both sides for hours.
Talk about that for a second. Like sometimes the zones would get so backed up. Good business. Shout out to the park for pulling people in, I guess. But you were supposed to play on fear of the anticipation or something like that. What would you say that a tunnel could hold? Like 200 people? Like 200 people just crammed in.
We talked about conga lines in the previous episode, and let's be clear, when we talk about a conga line going through the layer, this is not a conga line. This is a conga mob. This is not.
It was like a crowd of people. It's not just like a line, a 2 or 3 deep or whatever. We're talking like.
I would call them cattle sometimes.
Yeah. It would straight up look like a scene out of the Vegetarian film or something like that, and which for us would.
Cattle, like
it was terrible.
Vampires like screaming, like hurting them for their blood. Like.
Yeah, so I mean, when you had a situation like that, you could easily bump into people, and that was one of the things the park really was big about. Like, monsters will not touch the guests. They wanted to emphasize that from like the minute you stepped out of your car in the parking lot. So they didn't like us bumping into people, and we didn't want people like getting pissed off if we bumped into them by accident. But this guy with the black hair, that's where I learned this from, was when you bump into them, you just act drunk, but you play it in a vampire thing of, I'm sorry, I drank a drunk, I'm sorry, I drunk a drink. The gentleman I ate was inebriated. That's about all I can say. And you just do it in stupid accents, whatever. I know I'm mixing mine, but you would play it up as though you were drunk, and the guests, you would be like, oh, that's funny, huh? That's a good one. I like what you're doing. And they just walk away and wouldn't care. Sometimes they'd be asses about it, but it'd be what it'd be. So did you all want me to read this ungodly long? It's like 2,000 words. Oh, God.
Read the whole thing, Dave.
You're all going to learn how illiterate I actually am here real quick.
2,000 words spoken is not that bad, actually.
So, I'm going to start off. My character's name was Virgil J. Duke. My name is actually David J. Duke. I just wanted something simple.
Find him on Facebook.
Yeah. Good luck on that. So, I did some research back in like 1700s. I'm like, all right, I want my guy to be born in 1755. That way he could see some shit in the wars. Of course, I had him use the same birthday as me, at least day and month. So anyway, I even put the turn date. It's like, all right, how old do I want my guy to be, like, that I'm acting in the lair? It's like, all right, I chose his death in August 14th, 1780. Then I did the little preface because I was drunk off my ass. Like, I'm going to write this shit up professional, like, because we also had to post it in our Facebook group. Yeah, each zone, maze, whatever, would have Facebook groups, and that's where your TC, your talent coaching supervisor, like, hey, we want you to post your backstories. Please put them here so everybody else can read them and know how to interact with your character. Yeah.
Listen, as a TC, I'm gonna say it was homework. I'll agree it was homework, but like it really wasn't that hard. Y'all lazy. You ain't doing anything. You're laying at home. You're on your phone on your bed. You ain't doing anything.
This is the story of my human life and the incidents that led to its early end. I am writing this now, for I am bored, and I wanted to make sure I have this saved somewhere safer than in my head. I was born the bastard son of Admiral John Reynolds, an officer in the Royal Navy and the first Royal Governor of Georgia. The daughter of a store owner in Savannah, Georgia, and also worked as a server in a local tavern to help out her family. This is where my father told me he first met her. Unfortunately, she died shortly after my birth. What's the name for a good guy who's actually kind of more of a shady bad guy, but he's the good guy for the storyline?
The Pope.
But he's like an antagonist, but he's like a bad antagonist. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
Anti-hero.
Yeah, so so that's like that's the perfect setup for every anti-hero.
Yeah.
I live with my father and his wife and their 5 children. At the age of 3, I started attending a private tutor with the other children. I was 7 years old when we suddenly moved from Georgia to England, when my father was assigned to a new post. During my time living in England, not only did I attend some of the finest private schools, but I was also taught how to ride a horse, shoot a firearm, and use a sword and other bladed instruments. I also learned to gamble. Life was great, but everything changed a few months after my 12th birthday. My stepmother had grown resentful of me, for I was receiving higher marks in school and had easily mastered many other skills that her children were struggling with. In the spring of the following year, I was sent to live with my father's estranged family in Southern Ireland. So when I found out I couldn't do a Southern accent in the lair, I was like, all right, what else is really close to Southern that I can somewhat kind of like butcher my way through to some degree? And I was like, all right, Southern Irish. The Southern Irish accent was a lot easier, and it wasn't comical like the Northern Irish. For those who don't know, in Northern Irish, think of the guy from Lucky Charms, the leprechaun. The huddy at the end of every word. That's Northern Irish. Southern Irish is a little more subtle. I helped them work the fields and tend to the livestock. I lived and worked with them for 2 years. As time went on, I grew weary of day-to-day life. I would go into town often to drink and gamble, but I still longed for the adventure and a better life. In the fall of 1769, while taking the summer harvest to market, I heard about a cargo ship heading to Italy that was short-handed and in need. The following morning, leaving a note for my family, I set out for the docks and to begin a new life. After talking to the first mate, I was given a job on the ship and a week's pay up front. I spent the following week before setting sail, drinking, gambling, and pondering what I was to do with the rest of my life after reaching the southern coast of Italy. We sailed for 2 months before reaching the docks of Naples, Italy. As the cargo was unloaded and I was paid, I was on my way to where I was still unsure. I moved from town to town doing odd jobs for money and food. Eventually, I started working as a mercenary for lords and other wealthy individuals as I traveled throughout Europe. I didn't have a roof over my head for more than a night or two in a row, as I never stayed in one place too long before moving on to the next town and the next job. Though I enjoyed this life, after 7 years of bouncing around, I wanted to settle down for a stretch. While passing through Vienna, I met a madam who was in need of a decent barkeep and someone to help protect her girls and house. I took her up on her offer, for at least I would have a roof over my head, food, and steady income. For 4 years, I poured drinks for customers and myself, tossed out bums, broke up fights, even started some. I gambled and gambled, so more. I started noticing a problem, though. I like to drink and I like to gamble. While both of those activities separate are fine and dandy, but I like to mix the two. The more I gambled, the more I drank. And the more I drank, the worse I gambled. One early morning, the madam, who I had become good friends with, found me stumbling back into the brothel, still completely loaded from the evening before. She made me a pot of tea that smelled and tasted stronger than any Indonesian coffee that I had tried before. She then proceeded to inform me that I had a fortnight to straighten up, get clean, pay off my gambling debts, or I'd be out on my own with no job or room. About a week later, as if heaven sent, a messenger sent by the Lord Belarus arrived at the brothel looking for yours truly. As my services had been requested and the promise of great wealth piqued my interest once more. Once I arrived in Lyons, I was taken directly to the Lord's Hall to meet with him. While dining on an exquisite dinner and exchanging tales, he told me of the job he had to offer and how much he would pay if I accepted. He told me of a rival, Lord Renaud, to the west, that was taking his land and stealing from his people. Now, I was not one to usually get in between two lords having a pissing match, but for 2,000 kilograms of silver, I would have killed the Pope himself. As I traveled west towards Alriac to find Lord Renault and kill him, I realized in a sick, twisted way that I had missed this life. After reaching Alriac and locating Renault, I worked my way onto his house staff to study his habits, to find the best place and time to take his life. It took me about 3 weeks of watching, waiting, and studying, but finally I had the ideal time and place in mind. That evening I found him in his private garden alone as usual. As I approached from the side with a dagger in hand, with plans to pierce his heart and lung, he turned, looked at me, and without hesitating asked if Belarus had sent me, and if so, could I give him a minute to explain and hear him out. I thought about it for a second and decided that if a man had the nerve to stare death in the face and ask for 1 minute to explain, then the least I could do was listen to him before I killed him. He told me his side of the story, which I didn't listen to until he offered me double what I was being paid to leave peacefully that night and never come back. Naturally, I lied to him and told him that I was being paid 400 kilograms of silver, to which he graciously agreed to double without hesitation. I left that evening with saddlebags and 2 mules carrying the 800 kilograms of silver. I traveled for a day before burying the silver and turning around to kill Lord Renault. Even 2 days after an attempt on his life was made, he was a creature of habit. I found him again in his garden, but this time I loosed an arrow into his neck and watched him bleed out before leaving to collect the rest from Belarus. Upon hearing that I had killed Renault, Belarus was delighted and gave me the second half of my pay. Even after being paid, something inside me was not satisfied. I was not at ease until a few nights later when it came to me. I knew what I needed to do. It wasn't long before, just like Renault, I knew exactly when and where Belarus would be alone. As I was finishing up the last of my trap for Belarus and checking the flintlock rigged to the lid of the chamber pot, I thought to myself and laughed, for he would probably be the first and only man to die from an exploding chamber pot filled with black powder and metal shot. I heard the news a week later that he indeed perished for my present to him, but also so had 2 chambermaids in the next room. I was traveling east of Trent to pay off my gambling debts in Vienna. While taking a shortcut through the remote pass, a violent storm turned the lovely blue afternoon sky to an ominous dark gray, thus forcing me to seek shelter in a nearby system of caves. I awoke later that evening after the storm had passed to the sounds and smell of a campfire coming from deeper within the cave. After a short period of exploring, I came upon a cavern, and there in the middle sat 3 ghostly pale men with a rather large fire between them. As I stepped into the entrance, they turned to look at me, but not with a sense of surprise or worry. No, it was with a sense of pleasure, as though they had been expecting me. The first of the 3 men had an ancient Polish coat of arms tattooed on his lower arm and mystifyingly black eyes, which drew me in, all while sending a cold chill down my spine. The second stranger appeared lanky, but I had the feeling he could lift 30 stone with ease, and his hair was dark as night. The last of the group had peculiarly pointy ears, and his head was smooth and shined as a still pond at night does. For reasons I am still unsure of to this day, I told them of my life and travels and the reasons for the massive sum of money I had with me. It was then, after learning of my love for gambling, that the man with the dark eyes and tattoo asked me if I wanted to play a game of skill. Naturally, of course, I agreed. When I asked him what he had to wager, his face went cold, and what he said seemed to flow as smooth as silk.
Immortality against your life.
At first I chuckled, for surely he was jesting. Then I glanced at the faces of his and his 2 companions, and a feeling of somberness swept over me. He stood up and walked over to the edge of the cavern, only to return with a taffel mat in pieces. As he set it down between us, he asked,
"Do you know how to play Tabult?"
To which I nodded and agreed. As I looked down for the pieces to set up the board, he had already done so, and was waiting for me to make the first move. We sat there for what felt like hours, while the firelight glimmered off of the crystalline pieces, with neither one of us gaining the upper hand, until finally I had the advantage, as I moved my king into a single path of escape, exclaiming "Rashi" ever boastfully. As I looked up, hoping to see a look of confusion or worry upon my opponent's face, I instead was greeted with a sly grin and could hear chuckling from the other 2 strangers. With one move as swift as light itself, he had my king captured, and a feeling of dread started to fill my chest, as the other 2 men suddenly appeared behind me. The 3 strangers glared at me as though I was a fattened lamb heading to slaughter. I jumped up from my seat as I drew my flintlock pistol and a dagger. Stepping back, I told the 3 men they could have the silver and jewels I had with me if they could permit me to leave peacefully. Then, before I could pull the hammer back of the pistol, the lanky man ripped the weapons from my hands and had me pinned to the floor with his foot upon my chest. In a voice that echoed off the cavern walls, he said,
"We care nothing for mortal man's wealth."
As the other 2 strangers seemed to mosey towards me, the realization that my life would soon be over settled in my head. Yet knowing this, a feeling of relief, as a hot bath on a cold winter's evening, splashed over me, as I waited for the inevitable end. The stranger with eyes as black as pitch knelt down beside my head, and with the same tone he used to state the wager, he said,
"My friend, you were a worthy opponent, and even challenging at times. But you are no match for our centuries of practice, so it is time for you to provide your part of the wager. It has been quite some time since someone of your prowess has been able to challenge me, so instead of just taking your life, I will grant you immortality as well."
I nervously thanked him, for I was unsure what he meant, but I was in no position to argue. Before I had the time to ponder how I was supposed to die, yet become immortal, I felt 3 excruciating sharp pains in my neck and wrist. It wasn't long before the cavern ceiling started to fade in and out. As I prepared myself to meet the All-Father, I felt an arm placed against my lips, and cold blood trickled into my mouth. I heard a voice in my ear telling me to drink and receive the dark gift. Soon everything went black and my human life was over. And that's all I wrote.
Yeah, I didn't write anything remotely close to that when I got hired.
No, I think that's phenomenal that it kind of transitions into, I guess, like the context of what you're doing at Haunt. It's really cool when people come up with those backstories, because that one's pretty in depth. There's only a couple other people that we worked with that could compete that level of it. I was a lot more succinct.
Did they tell us to write something like that? Did they give us a limit or something like that?
No.
It was basically based on what your talent coach told you, and if your talent coach didn't care, then you just didn't do it. But I told my zombies and stuff to do it, but half of them would, half of them wouldn't.
I have a question for you, Brad. Yeah. Did you feel like the people who worked in mazes were different than the people who worked in zones? Did you feel like you had some sort of challenge to, I guess, managing them in any sort of way?
It comes with its own challenges, but I think that the mazes, the people that work in them are not necessarily different in scare acting, but they're a bit. It depends on where you started, but if you spend all your time in a maze, you're definitely going to be different than a scare actor in a scare zone, and I definitely believe that there is a divide there, but you can bring those things in there, because with mazes you're in solitary confinement, whereas with the scare zone you're doing riot control.
Oh, the style of scares are definitely much different from maze to zone. I learned that coming from Cornstalkers into the lair.
It was a maze.
So Cornstalkers was a maze. Cornstalkers was literally the actual only literal maze. We had dead ends. Everything else was just a fucking walkthrough.
It was just a corn maze, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it was a corn maze. It was this metal pipe structure they covered in burlap cloth and then zip tied bundles, literal handful bundles of corn to the walls.
Terrible.
Yeah, when it rained and shit got moldy.
It was the worst.
That was done. You were over. You were definitely over on that. But this one actually had a few dead ends. But they were take 2 steps, turn left or right, take 2 steps. Oh no, a dead end. And you would get back on track. So you never actually would get literally lost. But it was an actual maze. It was the only actual maze. But that one, there was nothing to play off of. There was no props. There was nothing. It was just straight up corn, unless you were lucky enough to be by one of the houses. So you had to use your imagination. You had to be on the spot, think up quick. There were a few people in there really, really good at that. But most people that weren't that good or got handed one of the really bad costumes, they just did pop scares. And you
feel like people usually got put into mazes before they went into zones. Just in my own personal experience, the first season that I worked there, I got put in a zone and it felt like I was being thrown to the wolves from the gate. I mean, there was just so many people. I had never scaring anybody ever for anything other than just your friends. You're just out there.
I would definitely say that it's more stressful to be in a scare zone, even though I was in a maze the entire time, and It's like scare zones have their own freedom, but at least in a maze, you have time to have nobody looking at you. You can hide in nooks and crannies. You can do things, which, like, you're supposed to be out there scaring and stuff, but, every scare actor that's worked in a maze knows that you all become cockroaches of that building, and you learn, like, every weird area, and, like, you dive in and out. But if you're in a maze, there's two reasons why they put you in a maze. One of them is that you're new and, like, there's more control, even though I think it's more taxing mentally because you're in one room.
Most of the mazes, right, were all enclosed areas, and so they would get hot and crazy gross inside. Like, it would be, especially later on in the season, because it runs from the end of September through October. Like, later on in the season, when it's like late October and it's it's probably like 50 degrees outside, like low 50s or something like that. Inside those mazes, like, you would walk past like people going to break and stuff like that, and you could sometimes feel the heat like leaving the mazes. It was crazy.
Yeah, I do think with mazes, like, another reason why they would put people in there, it was either you were new or you needed to be contained. Like, you were one of those scare actors that, like, if you were in a scare zone, there was going to be some problems, and they didn't want, like, the administration to see you.
When they put him in a steampunk scare zone, he killed it, though. But he was also he was a junior TC or a TC, I forget. But yeah, he destroyed some of the props there. But he killed it. He was actually really good. He was like, he could sometimes be a little wild.
I just want to say that the steampunk zone at this park that we've already given enough airtime to over their name or whatever, this is the dumbest zone ever. I don't understand. All of them every maze or zone all kind of made sense at the park except this one place where it was just people with gear sticking out of their face, and like that just made no sense. You got, we were in vampires. You had the corn maze, high school zombies, like all this stuff, like it all. Yeah, and then you just have robot people.
So they were trying to do steampunk, and steampunk is cool and all, but if you're gonna get like scary with steampunk, I think you need to take steampunk and throw it out the window and just introduce biomechanical horror, because that's what steampunk is about. No animals. Yeah, there should have been more like crazy stuff that incorporated like the alchemy or like the more like the biomechanical aspect. Like, everyone kind of knows that aesthetic. I think of like disgusting monstrosities of like these big Lovecraftian creatures that also have like
Full Metal Alchemist style.
Yeah, like chimeras that have like organic and intertwined mechanical parts, and like that would have been so much better, but that would have been too PG-13, I think, honestly.
Yeah, we couldn't go above PG-13 because before we had decapitated heads hanging from string. My first couple of years, my last 2 years, no, they cleaned all that stuff up.
I remember going to this park when I was like 8 years old and stuff like that, because younger than that it would get a little like scary for like small children. Don't bring side note, don't bring your kids to these mazes and parks and things like that, because some of them can handle it. Sure, that's on you, but like the majority of like young people that would come through there would just like not know how to cope. I'm talking about like young kids, so like just stop being a bad parent, I guess. But like I remember going when I was younger, and some of that stuff would scare the shit out of me. There was that one. Do you remember when they set the bumper car area into like, what was it?
Medieval Macabre.
That one, and there. Oh, what's the butcher one? Oh, Slaughterhouse was what it was called, and it was pretty self-explanatory. You just walked in, and there's just a bunch of dead bodies and shit hanging everywhere. And I remember going in that as a young tyke and being like, "Oh my god!" like terrified, So like I don't see why they would keep trying to. Yeah, as you got older, you're like, yeah, this is fucking sick. But like, I remember going and being like really scared, But it seemed like the more that we worked there, the more that the park tried to like tone it down a little bit. I don't know what the cause of that is. You guys have any thoughts on that?
The simple answer to that question is that Paramount Pictures, which is a far better company and a cinema company, lost. They sold it and moved it to Cedar Fairs, who is a corporate family-friendly kind of aesthetic, and nobody likes that when it comes to haunt. That's not why we're doing scary things. It's not for the props. It's not to be pretty. It's to be scary. It's Halloween, bitch.
Yeah, fuck corporations. And also, like Nate was saying, they should not even allow strollers at a haunted park. When the haunted park opens up, the strollers should be like automatically gathered and locked up, and it should discourage you from much as like bringing your infants. The amount of infants and small children under the age of like 8 that you would see that you would like almost trip over sometimes.
Yeah, you wouldn't do anything that you were like told. You're not using your training at all. They're just freaked out by you existing. And
they look at you and like in the makeup, and like for us, we had makeup and fangs, and some of us wore contacts, and they had the fake blood dripping on us. And you just look at the kid, and the kid looks at you and eyes locked, and they just lose it. And you're just like, you're laughing because it's funny, but also you're like, damn, I didn't even do anything. This kid's crying. I feel bad now.
People who brought kids that young, I don't know what they were thinking. There's an age where the kids just can't really understand the fakeness of it because it's very real to them. That's the problem. It's like a lot of these kids, they don't get it. Like, why did I see strollers coming through my maze? I would look around the corner and I'd be looking at a 2-year-old child.
I honestly hope these kids went home and like pissed and shit their bed for at least a week to get back at their parents for that, because that is some shit parenting.
Did you guys ever have any stories like when you were younger about going to parks and things like that?
No, I didn't. I honestly, I didn't start going until I was like 12 or 13 because that's what the responsible thing is. That, you know, like
I've got one story from when I was younger, just because it's funny and on topic, I guess. There's another park about 45 minutes like southeast of Richmond, Virginia. Yeah, owned by a very large international beer conglomerate. Yeah, so when I was young, we went to Busch Gardens. I remember going into, if you're familiar, they have like a giant dining hall, and where most of their food is. Like they have stands and stuff. But my family was in there one night during the Halloween stuff, and they have this. They're a lot more like, I'd say, theater influenced, you know. They have a lot more shows and like musical number type attraction things there, things like that. They just more theater or oriented. So we were in the dining hall having some food, and they had a show going on in the middle of the dining hall, and it was a vampire and a werewolf and a Frankenstein, and like just kind of covering all the bases. And I was probably like, I want to say 4, because this is like a vague memory. It's like right at the precipice of my origins of perception or whatever. But we were sitting there, and like I remember somebody like taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and it's a dude in like werewolf makeup or whatever, face, hair, patches, and everything, the fangs, like yellow eyes, and all that stuff. And I just screamed bloody murder in the middle of this cafeteria. Like, you know, there's like really like Tim Burton-esque music, like ha 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 Halloween, blah, 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 like that kind of stuff, and just one kid like ah! And like the guy was so taken back by it, and, you know, he was super apologetic, and immediately was just like, oh my God, like, I'm so sorry. Like my parents and like the crew that we were with all just started laughing at me, and they're like, no, it's fine. And like, meanwhile, I'm traumatized for the next like 10 years until I can start like fathoming what it is to go to one of these places. It's insane.
Busch Gardens is like great with their settings and all that, with their mazes, like their haunted stuff. They got a good interior, but their actors and makeup have a little bit more to improve on in some areas. But I think that they have been getting better over the years because of the rivalry and the amount of shit talk that we have like had between the King's Dominion and Busch Garden people, which, you know, we're away from this job, most of us. I'm not sure if Nathan is returning at all this year. I know like David, no, I don't think so. Yeah. Yeah, so we're pretty much done with it. So when we like identify with King's Dominion, it's more like we're talking like a blast from the past, although my identity centers around scare acting, but like King's Dominion only gets partial credit for that. Paramount Pictures had still been around because their set design was more based around, I guess, enhancing the experience for the actors.
It was definitely edgier.
No, it was definitely edgier when it was Paramount Pictures, but they also didn't try so hard like Busch Gardens does with the mazes, where it's untouchable. King's Dominion started doing this thing once like Cedar Fair got in. They wanted to compete with Busch Gardens, and at one point there was even weird stuff where like Busch Gardens people and King's Dominion people were in cahoots, and that's a whole different like discussion about a corporate level stuff and how they like interacted with each other. Their set design started getting inspired by Busch Gardens because they wanted to do that, but there's give and take. If you have good sets, it's like, okay, well, can the actors touch anything? Can they jump on anything? Can they get levels? Can they like not destroy it, but interact with the environment and like be rough with it? And if the answer is no, you've built a shitty maze. And that's like my honest opinion, is that this isn't a walkthrough gallery. We're not it's not a museum with like people that are just supposed to stand there and be a prop. That's not how this works. I'm sorry, people, but like if you're going to design a maze and be that high up designing stuff, you got to make it functional, because people pay money to be scared. They don't pay money to see how you went to, 2 years of school at Strayer University to learn about lighting. Nobody cares. That's not what it's about. It's about scaring. And
Get your education, though. It's important. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Get the education, obviously, if you want to. But at the end of the day, it comes from the interactions with the scare actors. That's always the focus.
not to play devil's advocate, but I definitely am for a second.
Devil's advocate.
Devil's advocate.
So there's two different schools of thought, though. Busch Gardens is G-rated. Like, their whole thing is family friendly. You're not supposed to go there and actually get scared like Nate was. You're not supposed to break out crying, piss yourself, shit yourself, go, oh, fuck.
Yeah,
King's Dominion, you were. It was PG-13. It was, you were meant to be scared. So I think that's where the difference is. Where King's Dominion was like, Busch Gardens was, they're like, all right, we want to make this family friendly, so we'll make the mazes look immaculate. We'll give all this scenery. We won't worry about the monsters, though, on the second hand, saying anything more than boo. It's okay to say boo. It's okay to go raw, and it's okay not to scare the person. Actually, I think that's why that guy was apologizing so much to you. Was probably he was afraid he was going to get fired for scaring.
He was probably just trying to interact with, he was probably just trying to interact with a guest or whatever, and I was just a baby.
King's Dominion, we were literally told day one in Scare 101, you cannot say boo. You get heard saying boo by a supervisor, TC, higher up, they will come and talk to you and write you up. You do it enough, you're getting sent home or fired. Like, they were that serious when I at least started, and when other people started, about you cannot say this, you cannot say that. And some of it was safety. All right, we get that. But a lot of it was you can't suck on your scare. Don't get out and go raw or boo.
No vampire joke intended.
Yeah, we did hear that a fair amount sometimes in the lair. Some really bad puns from the guests who thought they were comedians.
It was I think that's probably one of the easier monsters to make jokes about, right? Like, I would numerous times people come in and be like, "Hey, you suck," like,
Get it?
Oh yeah, but there's definitely a give and take. The better your set designs are, if you don't want to scare the people, the less scary your monsters can be. Where the other inverse, you want to scare the fuck out of people, and you have mediocre sets, you better have really good monsters. So they trained the hell out of the ones at King's Dominion, and their sets were mediocre. They started making the sets better, like, oh, whoa. Some of your scaring tactics that are really, really good are too good and are now destroying our really nice sets. Stop scaring.
Because we were all repeat employees there, did you guys ever notice that they definitely reuse the same costumes from
No, they do.
Years? I mean, over and over again. I think David and I, we had the same costumes a couple of years in a row, didn't we?
I had the same exact costume all 3 seasons in Cornstalkers. I knew that because I tore the shirt in a very unusual, unique way my first season I had it, and I remember how they patched it up. I saw that same shirt 3 seasons in a row.
It is interesting to see how the environment in scare zones played off, because scare zones between Busch Gardens and King's Dominion were different. They were talking about the G versus PG ratings, and the scare zones are where things really got shaken up, and the environments were usually the lair. I always thought of as in between. It was a scare zone, but since it was enclosed, it was almost like a vague maze, but it wasn't. It was still a scare zone because it was open air. You could just walk out at any point. There was no, but you guys were still restricted to not go beyond a certain area beyond the lair. So you could still get people outside of the strobe lights and everything, but y'all had the best of both worlds.
Everyone that worked in our zone really enjoyed when you could get somebody just outside of proverbial gates or whatever.
Well, somebody I know that worked in the lair, one of their scares trying to go from inside to out to do the whole, because nobody can see you. If you come from running inside the lair and out, nobody can see you. What they would do is they would get on the coffins, because there were some things that were aligned perfectly to where you jump on the coffin, run, and you could jump and grab those rubber flaps and act and fly like a swing almost. Caleb would also because I think Caleb was in the lair briefly too. That is one of the crazier things I've heard of somebody doing there, which using those flaps. But one time when he did that, he overdid it and literally swung himself into a trash can, because that country kitchen thing was right there, and they had trash cans lined up
full of fried chicken.
Yeah, and he yeeted himself into an open trash can.
That's amazing. Yeah, some of those, I don't think that those were that sturdy. I know that Caleb, sometimes it almost seemed like he would do those because he was bored, which was fun, because he would just be kind of lanky dangling from them and just kind of oh, I'm fucking dead, whatever.
And also, if we want to put the context of scare zones versus mazes as far as how dangerous and different it is. So I remember my last year when I was in the scare zone. It didn't happen near us in Necropolis, but like there was that night was that year was bad, and like they had to turn the floodlights on in the park, and essentially a 200-person brawl just busted out. It was up on the main strip, and
yeah, that year was terrible. It seemed like every weekend there was like some major breach of security going on. Like there was do you remember that like taser story or something like that? And somewhere in the I think it was Cleaver. Yeah, somebody got into some fight and they like pulled a taser out and like, yeah, I remember that being like a big thing for a week.
King's Dominion is genuinely wild to work at, and like it's one of those things where they need to improve worker conditions there, and I'm gonna be saying that a lot. We literally had, not gonna name him, a certain short boy whose name rhymes with Dick went up on Scare 101 and literally told everyone in the auditorium that they think that we get assaulted because it's usually our fault. That came out of his mouth. The Yellowverse, he was an area supervisor. Yeah. But yeah, he said that to everybody. He went up there, and like that is, everyone knows here what victim blaming is. It's 2020. Grow the fuck up. It's one of those things where we wanted to get up on that stage and like just hit him and be like, that was your fault. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not to like throw any shade at anybody's choices and what they do in their free time or whatever. But King's Dominion also started selling alcohol. Like it wasn't the first year. Like it was a few.
Yeah, they started to amp it.
It was a few years after we all started working there, and like every year, just progressively got more and more shitty from the customer's standpoint. I guess they all just started being really, really terrible people to the employees there. And that definitely had something to do with it, I think.
They started introducing these carts that would be in the scare zones, which they stopped putting them directly in the scare zones and more put them in between. But there would be a line for alcohol that I could walk up to where people were taking shots and I could scare them. And that's weird. That's a strange dynamic in that workplace, especially when the scare actors are underage.
It's weird for the zones because we get up so close to people, but you smell like alcohol on their breath and everything. If it's gotten to that point, like.
Let's also be reminded, we don't want to turn anyone away from this profession. We love it so much. It's so fun. But just keep in mind that you'll encounter a lot of strange things because it's one of the strangest professions that you can get into is scaring people professionally. You're going to see a lot of drunk because you're in entertainment. Entertainment is inherently a weird industry. When you're scaring people for money, that's strange.
I would say you definitely see everybody's real attitude.
So I swear it was like the first week I was in Cornstalkers. This lady had to be some 80-year-old like grandmother, short, wrinkly skin. I'm mannequinning in a corner because that's, again, my first week. Yeah, again, fresh, brand new, not really sure what to do. So I'm doing the very basic, rudimentary shit. I'm mannequinning in a corner. I'm dressed up like a scarecrow, so I'm pretending to be a scarecrow. This, 4'0" 80-year-old grandmother probably has, 7 grandkids and goes to Sunday, school, church, the whole 9. Comes up to me and grabs me by the crotch. I mean, full-on balls, shaft, the whole 9, reaching around to my taint. I swear I thought she was fake.
Is that the noise that it makes when somebody...
I don't know.
Bloop.
But it was I guess she thought I was a mannequin or something. Because she comes up to me and goes oh, and just does this. And then I guess she realizes that's actual testicles. Yeah, that's not hard plastic. That's real. And just looks up into my in my eyes to the mask and goes, fuck, and just walks away. Doesn't say I'm sorry, doesn't apologize, nothing. Doesn't even offer to buy me dinner after copping a field. She just goes, whoops.
I've got a. This one's not nearly as lighthearted, but the shittiest thing that anyone ever did to me when I was working there. There was these little brick walls on the side of the main stretch or whatever, and they have flowers and stuff in there during the summer. And for the times that a lot of us would stand on there and use them as a place to perch or something like that, a lot of the times I would stand up there when we would have too many people in the walkway to do anything really, where I was saying 200 plus people could fit into that place. For times like that I would hang up on there. This is probably my first or second year there. A bunch of people are coming through, I'm standing there, and I see this really tall guy, and that so I clock this guy and I'm like, oh, he's really tall, all right, I'm just chilling though. He probably gets maybe 12 feet away from me. I see him throw his head back and he just hawks a loogie at me, and he hit me square in the chest with such force that I could feel it through the 3 layers of clothing that we all have on. And like, yo, it made like a thunk noise. Like he really put some chuck into that, you know. That was so fucking gross. And like the worst part, he had to keep walking towards me. He eventually gets to me, and I just like leaned in his ear and was like, "That's gross, mate," or like something like that. And he just like looked at me like I was the one that was breaking the rules by like talking to him.
When it comes to like the layers, so we would think of like if you took a soda can and cut it vertically in half, laid it on its side, it's like a half cylinder, right? I like to pride myself on not getting scared. The fact that this was one of the only scare zones that had strobes made it even more dynamic. And I would get scared shitless because I always knew people that worked in the layer. I always knew one of these people. Because David, one night so talent coaches, they would have to go through, we would judge the other mazes, and we would all go to our talent coach meeting at the end of the night and like give each other, pointers. And we'd only do that like one night in the season. We got to dress down, walk around, see everybody's shit. I went through the layer and taking notes and stuff. And David, I can't even remember if he even gave me prior warning that he was going to do this. There was guests around us, and you grabbed me, like, not even, like, he wasn't joking. This wasn't acting. He just threw me on a coffin, acting like he was eating me or something and, like, killing me. And then, as the guests walked by, horrified, seeing me getting, like, slaughtered because I looked like a guest. Person in regular clothes just getting nabbed and, like, killed. He's, like, going off. What are y'all looking at, you fucking scallywags? You get out of here. Like, his, like, Irish, like, accent. And then he puts a flower in my fucking ear to show that I'm dead, because apparently there's some Viking ritual, like, you put like flowers in people's ear when they die.
And he puts you on a boat and
I felt like I was gonna be put into a canoe and shoved into the gross lake next to King's Dominion and be lit on fire. It was a great scare, and like I lived for those moments, but I wasn't sure if I was gonna leave that without a concussion. I loved knowing people and like having the relationship with people with my coworkers, but y'all hurt me sometimes.
No, the biggest reason people would get so messed up in the lair, it wasn't even the decorations. It was the fact you're mixing 30-some-odd strobes that were going off in random timing. It was never a clear pattern, but the fog mixed with it, so that when the fog kicked up, as you're walking, you're not only...
see your hand in front of your face sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it's what it did was it disoriented.
Thick fog.
Because you'd be walking, your eyes would just start to adjust to the light. Boom! It would flash white, and then all the smoke around you would blindingly white. Our first weekend there, you had to spend at least the half of the first night, you couldn't find your way around, and then you started to adjust to it.
Sometimes that would happen, and I would be afraid to like walk around because the fog was so thick. I'd be afraid I was gonna hit something or anything like that.
Oh no, you definitely had to adjust to it every night. Now every night got a little bit easier and a little bit easier, but still, the first like 10 minutes, once it gets dark, you were definitely gonna bump into something. You had to be a little easy. So as you're walking around, you would see other guests and monsters kind of shifting in the back in the shadows between the strobes. So it's like 1 minute there's somebody in the corner, oh shit, the next minute they're like 20 feet the other direction. You're like, oh shit. This is where I really love what Metal Jesus did. So we had a coworker we call Metal Jesus because he was in a metal band.
Yeah, for real, shout out to Metal Jesus. He was great.
Yeah, he had the long hair, but he could do this guttural 28 days style.
For any like metal fans, he was just doing like an inhale scream kind of thing. It sounded like a fucking pterodactyl though.
Yeah, it was so high pitched and loud. It was like iconic, demonic vampires just screeching coming at you scream. He could do the fucking hate that. He could do the disturbed little sound bit perfectly, like to a T. He was really good vocally, and he would do that screech and do other little noises. So I tried to pick it up. It was never as good as him, but I got okay at it.
We would have like a whole like chorus of people just screaming back and forth at each other throughout this tunnel. It was great.
He and I got in on the last season where we would just talk to each other as guests were coming through when it was slow, but like in character. So we would talk about a guest and saying, I really want to eat that one, and describe the clothing so they knew exactly who we were talking about. And the other person would either speak in English or some other made up language. Like we were talking some other foreign language they didn't know about them, talking about eating them.
Alistair, was that what his name was? Blonde guy? That was his name, right? Yeah. He knew, what was that? He knew Polish, which was crazy. Like he was like pretty much fluent. I mean, for someone who doesn't know Polish, he seemed fluent to me. Like he would just start rambling in Polish sometimes, like loud enough for people to hear.
Oh, he would cuss customers out and call them dirty names and like dirty things in Polish, and because they didn't understand, nobody got it. And he wasn't the only one. There was other people I knew in other mazes, in other zones that would tell you joking, like, yeah, I speak this like dead language, or I know bits of this language that nobody's really gonna know, and I just call people like whales' asses, a monkey's testicle, but the guests couldn't understand it.
I actually would like y'all to do a little bit of like your screeching or like some of the stuff on here. With the zombie stuff that I did, I just kind of refined myself. That inhale stuff, like I stayed away from that because that can be painful to do for 6 hours at a time. The snarling was my favorite. Like, like that kind of stuff. Or I would get in people's ears and they would hit me for doing that. Like that kind of stuff, like the inhale screaming kind of stuff as far as zombies. But with victim stuff, what I would do is I would be a lot more run-of-the-mill. So let me break into character for a second and be like, please help me. I can't. I don't know what happened. My friend was right next to me and I couldn't. Please, I need some fucking help. I would curse a little bit, but I wouldn't actually, like, I wouldn't make it audible. It would be like they got the idea. You know what I mean? All right, so let's hear like David screech real quick in the room. Like,
none of us have done these.
This is gonna take like 8 takes, and I'm gonna like blow my vocal cords out, and Brad's gonna yell at me because it's gonna suck. So
right now,
yeah. So I had a few noises I would do. One was kind of like a take on Brad's. It was like a stupid little guttural thing. If I was able to stalk up behind somebody, get in their ear without them noticing, I would either say something in their ear or just kind of do like a little bit of a guttural thing and then kind of say something. So it's just like a really low, just guttural, just kind of like, what the fuck was that noise? And they turn around and they're like, you're right there in their face, which was also a really good way to get hit. And then the high-pitched screech, so something very similar to that. And like the little communication language we had was just something. I mean, honestly, God, we got called zombies more often. The screeching and the gutturals, I would think, is the reason we got called zombies more than anything else. Yeah. Not because of what we look like, but I think people like heard the noise like, oh, it's zombies, not vampires.
For like an inhale, again, I don't know how many takes this is gonna be, but here we go. Jesus Christ, my throat just after that. Sometimes when there's a lot of people and like my general character was to kind of lay back a lot of the time, I would like to do this kind of like dog bark thing. There'd just be people screaming everywhere and, you know, I'd be like somewhere just being like, and they would just be like, what the fuck? It was so...
That sounds like a dog. Like, that genuinely sounds like a dog. Like,
yeah, that was interesting. Some people would like call me like,
where's the fucking dog?
Yeah, where's Fido at? And like, that was a lot of fun. I really liked doing that one.
Nate's over there being a vegetarian vampire, just eating animals, not humans, killing old Fido.
Yeah. It was part of the butler thing. I remember one season, like, I was way animated, like, and that was one of the years where we could be on top of the coffins and everything. The adjunct. Yeah, good guy or whatever, but I remember one night, like, I was doing this Heath Ledger Joker-ass vampire impression, like, on top of the coffin, being, you know, welcome to our lab, whatever the fuck I was saying, you know, like, welcome all, like, doing this whole thing, and, I was doing that for probably like 30 minutes straight or something like that. And then he came up to me and like tapped on the coffin and was just like, you need to like tone it down or like you need to do something else or something like that. And I was like, but I've worked hard on this. Like, this is like my thing right now. Like, let me live, bro.
Kind of wish that I'd spent more time like in a scare zone, but I don't know. I just really liked being in a maze and being able to be sort of belligerent. If you're in a scare zone, you can be seen more by your bosses. And like, I never fucks with that.
I don't know if Brad has discussed this on the podcast or not, but just so you listeners out there know, he was a maniac in some of these nights. We would all meet up afterwards and like you could just tell that like Brad had a night. His psyche was somewhere else and he was like trying to get it back some nights.
So definitely the blessing and the curse of the scare zones where you got to interact with the customers longer, but that was also the curse of the fact that you were exposed, and if you didn't have something ready to go, you were fucked. You were just standing there in the middle looking like a dumbass. Yeah. But at the same time, like Brad said, your manager, supervisor, anybody could walk up behind you, around you anytime. You may not see them, and you could be doing some stupid shit and get busted. That's the only good thing with the maze is you could get away with some really dumb shit. Like, you could definitely get in a customer's grill and do some sketch shit and get away with it.
Weren't you guys like ripping off wallpaper from the walls and stuff like that? Yeah, you know.
Jumping off
that wasn't me. That was a certain like golden boy that never got in trouble, always got promoted. That was rhymes with Buis Kapil, and he Boois destroyed everything, and I shit you not, y'all. For all the listeners out there, $10,000, $10,000 of damage that he did to Zombie High, and he got promoted. So if that tells you anything, is that as long as you as long as you don't fucks with their administration and the things going on, they won't fire you. But if you destroy a maze, you're fine. It's all good. They won't fix it either. But we actually got to wrap this up because I'm going to have to be editing so much of this because this is getting on like an hour and a half.
Simple and short, you can destroy a maze, just don't challenge their authority.
No, pretty much, you can I guess beat up the hand that feeds you. I don't fucking know.
Don't bite it.
Yeah, just don't bite it. You've been listening to the Scare Actor Podcast. It's been a ton of fun listening here with Nathan and David. Everyone needs to stay safe, stay scary, stay spooky. It's only September, but Halloween has pretty much started.
This was fun. I'm glad that we got to chill and talk about our war stories. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Thanks for inviting me. And wear your fucking mask, because if Halloween gets canceled because of you assholes out there, I'm going to lose it.
It's the one time of year where you're allowed to wear a mask in public, and come on, just do it. Do it for all of us, please.
On that note, peace out. Be safe.